Rick just doesn't want me to use his mic because this is the second time I've been here and his mic didn't work for me. So Rick's like, you know what, Trey? I'm not letting this work for you today. And so, be praying. It's one of those things. I want to ask you a question. I want to start off this way. It's not in here, but I notice it on Sunday mornings, and I've noticed this for a couple months now. Well, ever since we started gathering. The most awkward question over the last 6 months for me personally has been, how are you doing? Has anyone else noticed that that's an awkward question during this season? It's a question that I notice I feel awkward receiving. It's a question that I notice I feel awkward asking. It's a question that I've asked for many years when you run into someone, hey, how's it going? How are you doing? And most of the time we just encourage, most people just say, oh, I'm doing good. But now you almost know that that's just not a true statement for most people. And so now it's like, yeah. You know what I mean? Like that's literally what I see people do. Like, I don't know, right? We don't really know how we're doing. And that's whether that's mentally, emotionally, spiritually, or physically. It's just that question that we receive that we just don't really know how to deal with at a certain level in this season. And because of that, and because of talking to different people in the professional field of mental and emotional health and spiritual leaders all throughout the world right now, we realize that this is something we have to talk about. That we are in a season, it's normal, like who's been sick before? Has anyone been sick before? Okay, has anyone ever experienced like fear of losing a job, right? Like you don't have to raise your hand, but we've all been in these different situations. We've all faced situations like this, but we've never faced it with the rest of the world at the same exact time. Where there's similar fear, there's similar anger, there's similar emotions that are going on at the same time, and for all of us to go through this together, it creates a sense of panic. It creates a sense of worry. And so it's important for us to talk about these things. So we're in week 3 of a series called Restore. And what we're focusing on is that part of us that's maybe not doing so well mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. And for all of us here, I would say there's some aspect of that. And if you're not there, if you're doing okay mentally, emotionally, spiritually, or physically, then I just want to say have gratitude about that. Either you were prepared for something the rest of us weren't prepared for, or you were experiencing a blessing from God. Either way, have some sense of gratitude that you were in that place. But what we are focusing on is there's this commandment that we see in the Old and the New Testament. And it says to love the Lord your God and to love others and to love yourself with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, right? We are called to, or strength could be another word for body. Like we are to love God with all 4 of these things and to love ourselves and to love others. And if that's the case, then it's important that all 4 of these things are healthy. If the soul was the only thing that matters, which that has been a popular idea in Christian tradition, if the soul was all that matters, there's like a rave dance going on over here. Like you guys are really getting it in this section. But if the soul is all that matters, which has been an idea throughout Christian tradition, then Jesus would have said, hey, love me, love God, love me, love yourself, and love others with all your soul. Like that's all God would have said. That's the only commandment that Jesus would have given us. But Jesus didn't say that. He's saying there's multiple facets in which I want you to love God, love others, and love yourself. And that's with your mind, heart, body, and soul. And so if those things are important to God, then they have to be important for us. And we have to recognize that matter matters to God. Our physicalness matters to God. Otherwise, God wouldn't have created us in our physicalness. And that our mind and our body, we're supposed to nurture it. We're supposed to take care of it. We're supposed to recognize the importance of it. And when our souls, bodies, minds, and hearts are not healthy, we see that God is the God of restoration. That when we're in a place, when we're unhealthy, that God is the God that we are to come to and to allow to embrace us in that unhealthy place. And through that unhealthy place of being embraced, we can be restored. Now, not overnight and not all the time, but have moments of restoration in our life. There are things that God works for us and for his good and for our good. Now, a goal of this series that we've had throughout these last 3 weeks is that we take away one thing for each of these. And so week 1, we talked about physicalness and that God cares about our physicalness. God cares about our bodies, which means one takeaway could have been maybe exercising more or sleeping better or how we eat. And it's kind of interesting. This has nothing to do with really anything. It's just I found it interesting that like the number one diet throughout the world is the Mediterranean diet, which is the diet that Jesus would have been participating in throughout his life. And so the one diet that is the healthiest diet that we see throughout the world is the one that Jesus participated in. And it's just interesting. I don't know if it means anything, but it's just an interesting fact that I've seen. And then also one thing we talked about last week was spiritually, that we need to embrace those moments of solitude and silence. Maybe that was what you took away. Or making the Sabbath more holy, where we were to really practice rest. Or maybe it's the prayer that we were taught last week, the breath prayer that's, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me, to have moments of silence to pray that prayer towards God. Or taking quiet walks just to be in God's presence. Like that's something I do every morning. Is I have this amazing neighborhood that's just full of cul-de-sacs. And I can just walk in this neighborhood for 30 minutes each morning, just experiencing God's presence. And if I look over the past year that I've been doing that, some of my richest moments with God come from that morning walk. And in the scriptures, we see over 600 times where where walking with God was a part of the spiritual experience. Whether it's Adam and Eve or the road to Emmaus, whenever Jesus resurrects and he starts walking this road with his disciples, we see that walking is a spiritual experience for us to experience. And then what we notice is when we make these changes, when we add these practices to our life, we are more likely to experience God. We are more likely to share God with others, and we are more likely to experience a life-altering change to an act of faith in Jesus Christ for ourselves. And so today what we're going to be looking at is restoring our minds and hearts. We might say our mental and emotional well-being. And we're going to focus on that by looking at three aspects of this, and that is joy, anger, and fear. Joy, anger, and fear. You might say, yeah, I got 2 out of 3 on that one, right? Like I've experienced a lot of 2 out of 3 out of this one. But next week, we're still going to be staying on mental and emotional health when Rick gets back. But we're going to be focusing on anxiety and depression. And with this being September, we're going to focus on suicide awareness and prevention. That's something that's very important to St. Paul's. A part of our All-In initiative is that we become a voice that pushes against and pushes for the prevention of suicide and awareness here in this area. And it's honestly affected our church very much over the past 2 years. And so that's going to be the next week. But this week, we're going to be focusing on mental and emotional health when it comes to fear, when it comes to anger, and when it comes to joy. But when it comes to our emotions, and when it comes to fear, anger, and joy, we see that the scriptures are rich with examples. And when we look at these 3 examples, we actually see Jesus experience these 3 things throughout his 3-year ministry. We see a moment when Jesus sends 70 disciples out to proclaim the good news, to heal people's bodies, to bring them to a life of experiencing God. And after these 70 disciples go to different towns to proclaim the good news, they come back and they are filled with joy. And they see that it says in the scriptures that Jesus joined them in their joy. Jesus joined them in their excitement for what they had done in those different communities of healing and proclaiming the good news. And then we also see moments when Jesus has some real anger. Some of the biggest moments when we see Jesus' anger, most of his anger was towards the religious leaders. And as a pastor, that terrifies me, right? Like if God's going to be mad at anyone, it's so often going to be people like me. The religious leaders, the pastors, the rabbis, those different people are the people that we see Jesus, so angry at. Moments whenever religious leaders would choose rules over people. Well, you have to follow this rule, and they just would dismiss the person as a whole. And Jesus goes, no, anytime it comes to people and rules, we always choose the people. And then we see a time whenever Jesus comes into the temple and they're to make sacrifices, and there's these vendors at the temple that are actually overcharging people for the sacrifices that they're selling. And Jesus is so mad that these people are taking advantage of the poor in Israel that Jesus starts grabbing tables and flipping tables and starts, in John, it says that he had a rope. I always picture it kind of being like a beach towel, right? Has anyone ever, like anyone else in their life, right? Okay. That's kind of what I like picturing it as. But they say Jesus drove the people out of the temple with a rope to cast them out of there so that people could come and share their sacrifice with others without others taking advantage of them. And then the last thing that we see when in regards to fear is the Garden of Gethsemane. We see the night Jesus was arrested, he was so anxious and so fearful. He said, Father, can you take this cup from me? If there's another way that the good news can be proclaimed without this happening, please do it. And it says that he sweat what? He sweat blood, which is something that happens under extreme stress and anxiety and fear. That's something that can take place even in our own lives. But the question I have is, is there anyone else that's scared to be tortured? Anyone? Okay. Like it's a legitimate fear this might happen? Or, because, if I'm going to be tortured, I don't know about it. Otherwise, I'd be a lot more stressed out. But torture is probably not something that we're going to have happen in our lives, right? Like I would imagine it would be rare if any of us in this room experience torture. So we might not have real fear about that. Or is there anyone else that has the urge to flip tables because they're mad at the church? If you are, Rick will be back next week. So please save that for next week. I'll let you know. Go ahead. Please don't. But Rick will be back next week if you want to. But for many of us, like we don't have that anger towards the church where we just want to start flipping tables. Now maybe something else, or maybe just anger within that we want to start having outbursts. But for many of us, like flipping tables at the church is not something that we're feeling like doing or want to do. And so the question I have is, what is the examples for us when it comes to fear, when it comes to anger, and when it comes to joy? And here's some examples that I came up with for myself and what I'm seeing with others as well. One for me is struggling to concentrate or focus. I'm in such a place of fear. I'm in such a place of anger sometimes. I'm in this place where I'm struggling to focus on the things that are right in front of me. Whether I'm reading and all of a sudden I realize I don't even know what I've read for the past 10 pages, or whether I'm in a meeting and I realize that my mind's going a million places and I couldn't tell you what just took place in the meeting, or maybe I'm meeting with someone one-on-one, whether it's a family or a friend, and I'm talking to them and all of a sudden I realize my mind is somewhere completely else. And so if you realize and recognize that you're struggling to concentrate or focus, then maybe there's a place of a mental and emotional, there's an unhealthiness going on because of anxiety or fear or whatever it might be. Another sign of mental and emotional fatigue for me is forgetfulness. When I'm in a place of mental and emotional fatigue, I notice I'm forgetting everything. Like I don't have a lot of stuff, and I kind of call myself a minimalist, or I want to live a simple life. I don't want to have a bunch of stuff. And so there's a few things I take with me, right? There's my mask, my watch, my phone, what's in my keys, right? I have my keys. I have my glasses I take with me everywhere I go. In the mornings I have this, and then I have a watch, and then I have my cross necklace. But those are things I take with me every day. I lost this and my watch last week. I didn't know where they were for like 4 days. And then the other day I went to Walmart and realized that I left my credit card and debit card at home. And, at that point, I had no clue where I left it. And so I'm standing there in a Walmart line like, do you want me to take it back to the aisles? Or do you want, that awkward moment when you realize you don't have any way to pay for this? And so I've noticed over the last 2 or 3 weeks that mentally and emotionally, I've been in a place of fatigue where I'm just forgetting stuff left and right. And that's not even counting the tasks that I have at work, that there's moments where I'm like, man, how did I possibly forget that? But because of that mental and emotional fatigue, I'm noticing that I'm a lot more forgetful when it comes to things. Another sign of emotional fatigue for me is when I find myself looking for ways to disconnect. This could be socially. This could be with family, I notice with staff, whatever it might be, whether I'm diving more into social media, whether I'm just wanting to unplug for an extensive time watching TV shows, or maybe even for me, something I do so often that doesn't seem like a bad thing is I read. And if I'm reading a lot of books, that means I'm probably avoiding something, because I'd rather get lost in this reality than in the reality that I need to be facing in. And so the last one I want to point out, and one of the worst things for me that I experience, because it's possibly the most important, is I lose sleep. When I'm mentally and emotionally fatigued, I lose sleep. From 2 to 4, it's called the hour of the woof, where we wake up and try to go back to sleep and cannot. We're struggling time and time again. And we notice that for some reason there's something we need so bad, but we can't do it because of our mental and emotional fatigue. And so what we wanted to do and what we've done over the last 2 weeks is we found experts in these things to help us as a community, because it's so important that we face these mental and emotional fatigue or depletions, that we deal with them, that we don't avoid them, but rather we face them and figure out ways to overcome them. And so last week, Aaron had the opportunity to sit down with Carl Wendt. And Carl Wendt is a counselor with Mount Hope Christian Services over in Joplin, Webb City area. And Carl's a good friend of the church. Carl is someone that does yearly check-ins with our staff. We have a meeting of 20 minutes, and if there needs to be follow-up care, we will. But he's just brilliant when it comes to mental and emotional wellness. And it's a rich conversation that I found a lot of life in, and I hope you do too. So please take a look at our lead pastor, Aaron Brown, and Carl Wendt.
So I'm here with Carl Wendt. He's the director of Mount Hope Christian Counseling and also a professor at Harding University.
Yes.
And also teaching at
Ozark
Christian College.
Yeah, for fun.
For fun.
Right, why not?
And what I've asked him to be here and talk about a little bit is, as we're in the Restore series, how do we restore our emotions, our minds? Those two are so closely linked to one another. And one of the questions that I wanted to start with and ask about is, what does emotional depletion look like?
So different in different people, but you can just see it all over the place right now. With COVID running rampant, everything is 30% worse. We've got more depression, we've got more anxiety, we've got more suicide, we've got more divorce. Everything, you just take whatever normal problems people had and just add 30% to that. And it's ramping up as a society and as a group. And it's just exhausting everybody, wearing people out.
Mm-hmm. What I think we often feel is, I can't exactly say what's going on in me, I just feel blah. How would you help us to take that from just a feeling of blah to maybe articulate it a little bit more? How do we, I don't know, I'm probably not asking the right question.
But that's a great question to start with, because even to notice that, there's something very healthy about that. Gordon MacDonald talked about us like a car, like a really sweet car. I don't know what would be the best car, if I could think of one for you.
A red Jeep Rubicon.
There you go. And it's just mint. It is fantastic. And some people, I mean, it'd be ridiculous if you got a great car like that and you just thought, this car is so good that I'm never gonna have to do anything with it. I'll never have to take care of it. Don't have to put gas in it. Don't have to check the oil. Never have to air up the tires, vacuum this, because I got a good enough car that I don't have to do any of that. And people do that with themselves. They just kind of think, if I'm good, I'm good. Me and God, we're good, let's just go. But if you're smart with a car, you're gonna watch the gauges. You're gonna watch for those little warning signs. Gas is getting low, it's under half, time to fill that baby up. 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 miles, maybe it's time for an oil change. And you're watching that. But with ourselves, we need to notice, am I feeling blah? Have I been down more lately? Am I running hot? You watch all those gauges. A car has a heat gauge, so you don't want it to run hot. But some people run hot and they never even notice. Finally, they have to get that feedback from somebody else. Why are you so angry all the time? I'm not angry all the time. It's like, oh my gosh, But to be aware and to even ask those questions is the right start.
Let's talk about anger specifically, since you brought that up. What can we do about that side of our emotions when things get off, when our routines are different, when we have different sets of pressures? Anger can be one of the things that really lashes out. What can we do to mitigate that and make sure that we're being angry in healthy ways?
Experts used to say that if you had anger, you needed to express it. It was like a pressure cooker that you, and people even talk about letting off steam, and that there's something about that takes the pressure down. We're now looking at that and saying that sometimes if that's not done in the right way, that just makes everything worse. Just because that steam can get in somebody's face, and and there's problems with that. We do need to be honest with our feelings. We do need to express those things, but just blowing up, and some people use that as an excuse to just go ballistic. There's something unhealthy about that. I think being able to look at the real cause and say, am I really angry about this? I can't find my keys. That makes me mad. Yeah, and it does. But does it make me this mad? So there's something else going on. So if there's something else going on, let's address that and let's talk about that.
So you've got to dig deeper at the cause of your anger.
Yes.
How does one do that? How do you go deeper?
Well, and sometimes you can self-reflect. You can ask God for wisdom. Sometimes you've got to talk to somebody who loves you and say, okay, I know I'm running hot. What's going on? Give me some, what are you noticing? And sometimes you just need to reflect that through somebody else.
You're using a counselor, to
Right.
help do a little bit of unearthing can be.
I think sometimes talking to a counselor is what you need, but sometimes it's just talking to a best friend, or sometimes it's talking to your spouse, or even to your kids, and being honest, saying, I know that I blew up on you yesterday, and I apologize because that was out of proportion. And I'm going to work on that. And being able to ask is, what do you see is going on with me? I'm figuring that out. I'm working on it. I'm going to be honest. I'm working on it. And then you get several pieces of insight, and try to take that gently and kindly.
Let's talk about fear.
Okay.
Fear is another big emotion that I think is depleting a lot of us.
Yes.
How do we identify fear? How do we manage it?
Two main ways to attack fear. One is to do something to be safer. So sometimes when we're afraid, we actually need to do something to be safer. If a tiger jumps in the room, my heart's gonna go crazy. I'm gonna go fight or flight, and I'm gonna do something about it. The problem is if my heart's doing that when there's no tiger in the room and nothing's in the room, but I'm still on fight or flight, and that's when I need to bring it back down. So if there's something I can do reasonable about the threat, then I do it, and that makes me feel better. But if there's nothing to be done about the threat, then I know that I need to deep breath. I need to find ways to relax more. I need to find ways to calm down.
In light of everything that's happening in the pandemic and how many things related to fear that just kind of jump out because of that, what might be some things we can do to just kind of tamp that fear down? What are the secrets?
So different for everybody, but my mother-in-law was living with us. She loves to have MSNBC on all the time. And I'm a naturally reasonably calm person, but after a little while, that was just every news story of a blam, 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 blam. I think taking that in pieces and saying, okay, I'll give that whatever, but it's budgeted. I'm gonna budget, whether it's 15 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour, I'm gonna budget for that so that I can deal with that emotionally, then click that sucker off and let's do something else. Spending so much time on something that I can't do anything about just ramps the anxiety.
So what I hear you saying is, when it comes to fear, just don't feed the fear as much.
Yeah.
And if that's what you're reading, what you're watching, if that's creating those fear feelings,
right,
turn it off.
Right.
Or
And
budget it. I like the way you said budget it.
Yes. Channel that into something I can either do. I'm either going to do something about it, or I'm not going to think about it. But I'm not going to lie in that where I'm just thinking about it but not doing. That takes me nowhere. That builds up the pressure.
One other thing I wanted to talk about related to our emotional side is burnout. What can you say about that? What is it, and what can we do about it?
I think that's just running the engine too hot, too long, just letting it go, without breaks. Even Jesus sometimes would get in a boat and go to the other side of the lake. You could say, were there people with needs on this side of the lake? Yeah, but it was time to go to the other side of the lake. Of course, then they'd end around and they'd follow him there, but he'd find his own way. He'd have, you just have to. You have to pace yourself. My daughter was, when she was in 6th grade, all the sixth grades in Joplin were going to have a 1 mile run, and they just thought this would be a wonderful thing. And so they got all the sixth grades in Joplin, and they took them out to the track at Missouri Southern, and they had a guy with stripes, looking like a ref, and he had a little gun, a fake gun, to pow, and they all run, and they were not prepared at all. It was a terrible day, because that's 4 times around the track, and they just all as fast as they could go, and by 1/2 of a lap, there are people, they're screaming, and they've got hamstrings, and then this girl, halfway around, puking, and it's just like, oh my goodness, they didn't pace it at all. They just ran full tilt, and except there's this one little group of girls that knew what they were doing, and they're just kind of running slower. They were behind everybody else, but they just very quickly, they ran about the same pace all 4 times around the track. And there you go. And everybody else is it was just a terrible idea, but we have to pace ourselves. You don't run a marathon the same way that you run a sprint. And the good Christian loving people just want to care and help and serve, and that's fantastic, and that's what we should do. But you pace that. You say, I'm going to run this like a marathon, because I want to serve people tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And so I'm just going to get a good pace for a marathon. And marathon runners aren't wimps. It's not that they're running slow. They're running hard, but they're not running stupid. And sometimes as Christians, we accidentally run stupid.
So Carl, our minds and emotions are deeply connected to one another.
Yes.
How can we use our minds to address our emotions so that both are healthier?
There are different schools of counseling. There is emotion-focused therapy, which tries to work on your emotions to change your thinking. Then there's cognitive behavioral therapy, which works on your thinking to change your emotions. And there's some truth in both, because they're just so tied together. And the word says, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. And there's something true to that. I think that we can move our emotions by changing what we think. And I think that's a powerful biblical principle. When we're the most scared, the most depressed, we can ask ourselves, what am I thinking that's taking me there? Well, I'm a terrible person. And then that's where you need some, if you're really honestly stuck in that, you may need some help. You may need somebody with some perspective to bless you with that. And that can be a professional, but doesn't have to be. That may just be a reality check with someone else. But to work on that thinking, to say, okay, there are things in my life I'm not pleased with, but I am trying to grow closer to God. Does a terrible person try to get closer to God? No? Okay. So maybe I'm not a terrible person. I'm still not the person I want to be. You're trying to make that more realistic, and then it doesn't hit me in the same emotional way.
So my next question is, how do we address people or approach people that they are angry or afraid or stressed? What can we do?
You love and you care and you sympathize and you try to help, but you just don't join people in that emotion. You don't have to join people in that emotion, but you care and you listen, and there's a blessing there. A gentle answer turns away wrath. Wrath doesn't turn away wrath. Somebody's angry, gentle answer. So you listen and you care. But you don't have to be pulled into that. You don't have to live at that same anxiety level or that same anger level.
What are the best ways to cultivate joy?
That's harder on certain days. Have you noticed that?
No.
Right. People talk about gratitude journals, where you just get a blank little notebook and you spend 30 seconds a day writing down something you're grateful for. And 30 seconds a day. And people have found that if you'll do that 30 days in a row, just 30 seconds, that they get a similar boost in morale and feeling as to taking antidepressants. A similar boost. I thought, that's a nice 30-second a day experiment that would be worth a try.
Well worth a try.
Yeah,
to
why not?
Cultivate joy.
Right.
Wow. Dr. Carl Wendt, thank you very much for your insight.
Thank
really
you.
appreciate you and what you do. Thank you for
you.
sharing.
And so the thing is,
So I'm here with Carl
we
Wendt,
do not.
director of Mount Hope Christian
Aaron's trying to steal
Counseling,
mine
and
from
also
me. But no, the thing is, I don't know about you, but for me, I have the tendency to just experience emotional or mental depletion and just kind of stay there, not really want to deal with it, not really want to face it, not really want to take the steps necessary to kind of get to a different place. But the thing is, Jesus doesn't want us to stay there. Jesus wants us to experience life that really is life. Jesus wants us to experience new life and resurrection on the other side of suffering. And for us to do that, that means we might have to do things differently. We might have to take up some practices that we've never taken up before. We might have to do some things that we've never done before to experience that new life. And so what we want to focus on each week is, hey, you don't have to try a bunch of new things, but maybe one thing, trying one new thing that will cultivate something new within you, because we're all facing different things. For some of you, maybe that's dealing with anger. Whether anger at the situation, anger at a situation, anger at someone else, anger because you scrolled through social media, whatever it might be that has brought up that anger, but you've noticed, like, man, I'm dealing with anger in ways I've never dealt with anger before. And I think it's important that when we talk about anger, there's this passage that comes from the brother of Jesus. And we imagine it's the younger brother of Jesus, but he says, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. And who do you think James learned that from? His brother. He probably sat there and watched his brother Jesus deal with situations that would have stirred up anger in anyone else. But he noticed what Jesus did. Jesus would experience something that caused anger, and he'd be quick to listen. So often when we think quick to listen, we think of listening to someone else. But I think in this situation, so often when we're quick to listen, it's listening to what's happening in here. I receive something that has caused me anger, a circumstance, a situation, something someone else has said, something someone else has done, and in me, I am furious. In me, I am angry. And what we sometimes want to do is just burst out and say whatever that is immediately. But what James says is, be quick to listen. Listen to what's going on in here that's causing that anger. Is it the actual situation, or is it something else? And then once we're quick to listen, we're slow to speak, which means we need to take time to process before we speak out, before we act out, before we do whatever it is we're feeling. And then that creates the slow to anger. So if you're dealing with anger, maybe it's taking time to memorize that passage. Quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. For human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Guess why I have that memorized? Because I've had to deal with some anger. I had a coach that made me memorize that my freshman year in college, not because I was Mr. Cheerful, right? He goes, hey, I got a verse for you I'd like for you to memorize. And that has helped me so much because it's made me listen to what's going on anytime I experience anger. For some of you, it's fear. Fear of your health, fear of someone else's health, fear of your job, fear of paying the bills, fear of just the situation that you're in, whatever the fear might be. And what I want to point out is that fear and joy sometimes are so much together. We experience fear, and there's something we can do. We can step towards that fear, or we can cultivate joy to counter that fear. There's a person named Brene Brown. I encourage everyone to, if you've never heard of Brene Brown, look her up and read some of her books, listen to her podcast. But Brene Brown is a sociologist that studies fear and joy, and she says that so often we want to sabotage our joy. That we'll be sitting there, and like every night I go and check on my kids, and I'll look at my son, and I'm experiencing great joy towards my son or my daughters, and then the next thing is, what if something happens to him? Like instead of encapsulating that joy and just resting in it and being like they're okay right now and just sitting in that joy, we immediately go to fear. And what we notice is that fear and negativity will stick like Velcro. Has anyone ever noticed that? When you're in a negative space or when you're in a fearful place, that thing will stick to you like Velcro. I'll receive 99 compliments, one negative comment. Guess what sticks to me like Velcro? That one thing, that fear, that anger, whatever it might be. But then they say goodness and joy stick like Teflon, like it bounces off of us. Like whenever we're in a negative space, we'll think in our minds, I'm going to be here forever. right? I'm never going to overcome this. I'm never going to be in a better place. But when we are in a good place, guess what we never think? I'm going to be in a good place forever. It's like we know that good things are only going to last for a little bit, but we always imagine that negative things will last forever. And so what I want to encourage you to do is when you experience fear or something, try to cultivate joy. Try to create joy. And I think one way that I try to do that in my life is every morning. I received this. I did a funeral last year, and they said that their mom would wake them up every morning and sing, "This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it." And it's a psalm. And she would just wake them up so cheerful. And they said that it didn't really cultivate joy when they were 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. But man, when they became adults, when they went to college, when they became adults, they would sing that song and it would immediately cultivate joy within them. And so their mom, by a consistent practice, did something to cultivate joy in their lives just by singing a song every morning. And so guess what I do to my 9-year-old and my 3-year-old and my 2-year-old every morning? Is I wake them up by singing this song. And guess what they hate every single morning? Me singing that song to them. But I'm hoping what happened to her will happen to me, so that it'll cultivate some joy in their life. But we can't just wait for joy to come. We have to cultivate it in our lives. And I think lastly, I want to leave off with cultivating joy is what Carl and Aaron mentioned. And that's write it down. My worst situations in life, the rock bottom moments in my life, I had something to be grateful for. Whether it was a family member, whether it was God or Jesus, whatever it was, there was something to be grateful for. Now, there were moments when I had to search for it more than others. But there's always something to be grateful for, even in our darkest and hardest moments in life. And when we do that, it won't be immediate, but it will cultivate joy and new life on the other side of death and suffering. And lastly, I want to say this. If you are in that dark place, if you are mentally and emotionally feel like, man, I'm at rock bottom, Jesus is with you. God is with you. A Holy Spirit that God has given you is within you to cultivate something new. But also, Pastor Rick's with you. You have a community of faith with you. And you are not alone in this journey. You have a God that loves you, a community of faith that is within you, and a Holy Spirit that has given you new life and new possibility in any circumstance, in any situation. And so rest assured knowing that God has not left you alone with anything, with nothing. He has given you something in a community and in himself, okay? But don't go alone. If you are in that place, let others know. Share that with God. Be honest with God, be honest with yourself, and be honest with someone else. That's the most important thing that we can do in this season. And so remember, you are not alone. And no matter where you're at, that is good news, folks, that you are not alone. God is with you, others are with you, and God has given you a spirit to overcome anything. And that is good news in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.